excited that Melody Stewart has joined us today to be our guest speaker. Melody Stewart was elected in 2018 as the 161st Justice to serve on the Supreme Court of Ohio. Prior to joining the Supreme Court, Justice Stewart served on the 8th District Court of Appeals for 12 years and was the court's administrative judge in 2013. After starting her legal career as an assistant law director for the cities of Cleveland and East Cleveland, Justice Stewart subsequently worked as a lecturer, an adjunct instructor, and an assistant dean at Cleveland Marshall College of Law before joining the full-time faculty at the law school. Additionally, she taught at the University of Toledo College of Law and at Ursuline College. She was also director of student services at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Justice Stewart earned a Bachelor of Music degree from the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati, her law degree from Cleveland Marshall, and her PhD as a Mandel Leadership Fellow at Case Western Reserve University's Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences. She was also awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Cleveland State University. Justice Stewart has served on many boards and committees, including the Ohio Criminal Justice Recodification Committee, the Ohio Supreme Court's Judicial College Board, was chair of the Ohio Capital Case Attorney Fee Council, and served as a commissioner and chair of the Board of Planning and Zoning for the city of Euclid. Justice Stewart is admitted to practice in the state and federal courts in Ohio, the District of Columbia, and the United States Supreme Court. Of historical note, Justice Stewart is the first African-American woman elected to the Ohio Supreme Court. Justice Stewart.
Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland for having me as your guest speaker for this year's annual meeting. To all of you and to League members across the nation, congratulations on your recent 100-year anniversary. I apologize if you hear some motor going in the back. It never fails that when I get on a Zoom call, landscapers want to do something around. So I apologize if you hear that. You know, about over 100 years ago, when your originating body formed, you no doubt formed out of necessity during that time. I mean, organized initially to aid women as they finally became electors after decades of advocating for the right to vote, but also looking ahead to begin to navigate and to support the inclusion of women in public affairs and in policy decision matters. So 100 years later, the work of the League, unfortunately, is still necessary. Some might say now more than ever in recent times. So I thank you all for all that you do and all that you'll continue to do. I'll give you a brief background on me. Some of you may already know, but for those who don't, I am a native Clevelander through and through. I was born and raised here, and with the exception of a bit of time spent in undergrad in Cincinnati, and when I taught at the University of Toledo College of Law, I've lived in the greater Cleveland area in the cities of Cleveland, East Cleveland, and in Euclid. I have 4 siblings, but grew up an only child. I was raised by a single mother who was born and grew up in the segregated South, ironically around the same time that this organization's originating body was forming. The colored schools in Virginia, where my mother and her family lived, only went up to the 8th grade. So when I was growing up, I assumed that sometime along the line, after my mother moved north, she completed her education because she was so knowledgeable and so well-read and instilled in me the appreciation of knowledge, not just in the form of formal education, but knowledge in general. She taught me how to play Scrabble when I was in elementary school, and I didn't beat her until after I got out of college, I might add. And in addition to how to play Scrabble, she taught me how to read the stock market ticker tape, those symbols in the newspaper, amongst a lot of other things. She also instilled in me a love of the arts and would take me to the theater and the concerts of all genres, and would eventually enroll me in the Cleveland Music School settlement throughout my entire secondary education, elementary and secondary education, where I studied music theory and piano and guitar for a combined 12 years before enrolling at the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati. So, I mean, as I often say, with a name like Melody, what else would I have majored in college other than music, right? It wasn't really till after my mother died that I discovered that she got her GED just before I graduated from college and when she was in her early 60s. I never thought about being a lawyer, let alone a judge or Supreme Court justice, until I did. This is the case even though my older sister, my mother's only other child, is also a lawyer. So I'm here before you not as one who dreamed of being this or that or entering into a certain profession. The truth be told, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. But in the meantime, I've always learned to do the best wherever you are, make the best out of any situation, and always, of course, leave a place better off than it was before you got there. I often tell younger people, students primarily, that, you know, I work as a Supreme Court justice the way I did as a judge, the way I did as a lawyer, the way I did as an office worker, a babysitter, when I delivered newspapers, plain dealer too, not the Cleveland Press, for those of you who remember when we were a 2-newspaper town. Get up early in the morning, deliver papers before going to school. And what I mean by that is, you know, of course, it's really not the title of what you do and or the work, because all work has value and work is important. It's the way you do the job. So I often say, you know, if I were your garbage collector, I'd be the best garbage collector you ever had. And a young man once said to me, you know, well, what's there in collecting garbage? You pick up the can, you throw it in the truck, you move on. I said, but you know how sometimes things fall out of the truck and you have potato chip bags on the sidewalk or, you know, some garbage around. I said, that wouldn't be the case if I was your garbage collector, because you clean up behind you and you make sure the garbage can is sitting upright and that the top is on and not over Mrs. Jones's yard or not rolling around in the streets. So it's just, it's how you do the work. But so in the meantime, I've been very fortunate that I've had jobs and gone and gotten education that has allowed me to continue to grow. And I consider myself, you know, a lifelong learner, and I'm grateful for the exposure and the guidance I had and the environment I had in my formative years as one who was getting prepared to serve her community as an elected official, even while I was unaware that that's what I was doing. There's a lot that we could talk about in the way of judicial reform and our justice system being more equitable and being fair. There are so many improvements that need to be made that I've recognized over the years as a practitioner in law, as a legal educator, but certainly as a judicial officer in our court system. And I'm hoping that we can move forward with the assistance of organizations like yours and just with community involvement. We have to do better, and we have to stop villainizing the other side. It's going to take a concerted effort on the part of so many people and so many constituencies. And I have a great deal of faith that we will get better. You know, it won't be nirvana and it won't be perfect, but every step we make, even an incremental one, in the area of having a system that is more just, that is more accessible to people who don't necessarily have means, that is fair, and that is that serves the people of the community and just doesn't serve those who work in the system by way of extra money and overtime, or that we say that's not us or it's not impacting us. In my opinion, people shouldn't have to pay for being accused of a crime. We are a system of innocence until proven guilty. But our system makes you have to pay for being accused of a crime, being charged with a crime, and sometimes the cost is high. Obviously, the most salient part, the most crucial part of having to pay is with your life. But even the detriments in our system of people losing jobs and people losing housing and people losing their children and their careers, again, having not been found guilty of anything. We, of course, have to recognize the role of implicit bias in our society, implicit and unconscious bias that we all have. You know, no one is excluded from that, and recognizing the role that that plays in our day-to-day work, regardless of what we do, and being able to check for that, and being able to put in systems that check more so for that. I think so many of our problems are due in large part to allowing individuals to make discretionary calls when they shouldn't be able to make discretionary calls, or when there are no checks and balances for the discretion and the underlying biases that drive those discretionary calls that cost people unnecessarily their lives, their freedoms, their ability to be, you know, full citizens in our society. And I believe if we put systems in place that better serve buffering those kind of discretionary calls, we will be better as a society. So I think we have to re-examine a whole lot of things that we do. We have to continue to fight against those who try to disenfranchise, and you know, let's call it what it is. It's an effort to disenfranchise people. And I know there are a lot who think that it's targeted to the poor and it's targeted to minority communities. Well, the truth be told, if you look at it, for those who are in power politically, they wouldn't try to disenfranchise poor communities or communities of color if those communities were voting in large portion for them. So it is really more politically and partisan politics that I think saying it's targeting race and it's targeting socioeconomic backgrounds is really too simple. I think it really is driven by efforts to maintain control, maintain power, and maintain majority. And that's regardless of whether those people in elected offices are serving our communities as they're supposed to be doing, as it is when you get to be an elected official. So, you know, this organization is one of those whose work has made it possible for me, a woman, and a woman of color, to not only be an elected official or public servant, but to be one who has the honor and privilege of serving at the highest level of our judiciary. And it is not a responsibility I take lightly. In the meantime, for the time that I have remaining as a member of the Supreme Court, whether for just the remainder of this term, I can't believe at the end of this year I'll be halfway through my term, or for an additional 1 or 2 more terms. And, you know, by the way, do you know, I'm sure many of you do know, that our judiciary is the only elected office in our state that has a mandatory age bar for any judgeship in Ohio at the state level, because federal courts are different, those are appointed. But for judiciary in Ohio, you can't run for any judicial seat at the municipal court level, common pleas, appellate court, or Supreme Court if you will be 70 before that term starts. And that is the only elected office in our state that has that. So that's why the maximum amount of terms I would be eligible for would be 2 more terms based on age. But I'm sorry, I digress. Anyway, for how many ever terms or how much time I have left on the court, I will do my part to work tirelessly to make our justice system better and to better serve the people and entities of the state. There's so many ways to do that, as I touched on earlier, and they're much too numerous to name here. But with the continued efforts like those of this organization to advocate for individuals and for their rights to vote, for diversity and inclusion, and for just more sound policy decisions, those that are not based in partisan politics or rooted in retaining power and control, but on policy decisions that are designed to serve the people of the community and the constituents in a meaningful and an equitable way. I know I need to reserve some time for questions, which I'd much rather address than drone on to you ad nauseum here. So to all of you who have tuned in this afternoon, I thank you for your time and attention. and for your interest, and please do stay engaged.
Okay, thank you very much, Justice Stewart, for your remarks. And as you might expect, yes, we're a very inquisitive bunch of people, and the questions have been flowing into the chat. I think the first one I'd like to ask is whether you could speak to the Ohio Black Judges Association, which you helped start.
Well, actually, I cannot take credit for it at all. I did not help start it. By the time I got involved, excuse me, by the time I got involved, the formers of the organization had already done all the work. It's recently started a group of African-American judges in the state, started the organization, which, by the way, is inclusive. Any judge in the state of Ohio can be a member of the organization, but it is designed to have African-American jurists in this country be a little more vocal and take a leadership position in being sure that we recognize what's happening to, or how our justice system is impacting minority communities. And it is a system that is impacting them, not just white judges and Black defendants. I mean, you know, quite frankly, we have African-American judges who have not, I think, done well by defendants in our system, both Black and white. And so it is a recognition that there is disparities in our justice system, and it's holding us accountable as minorities represented in our judiciary, and then collectively holding our entire judiciary, brothers and sisters, African-American men, women, non-African-American, accountable. So it's just got started this year. We've only had a few meetings, and quite frankly, we haven't even had the opportunity to participate, I think, in meaningful dialogue about it.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting perspective, that diversity in the community alone is not, it is necessary, but I guess what you're saying is it's not sufficient.
Correct.
Okay.
That's absolutely right.
That's a wonderful insight for us. A lot of times issues get broken into left and right. Are there common areas of agreement between the so-called left and the so-called right on criminal justice reform? If you were looking ahead to ways to improve our criminal justice system, are there points of agreement that you think we could start with?
I think there are, and it almost depends on whose wheel is squeaking the loudest. I think, you know, having had a social science background too, that we should all be able to agree that data will help drive informed decision-making. That shouldn't be a controversial topic in my opinion. I mean, if anything is more concrete, then it should be data and data analysis. However, in my belief, and this is just my personal belief, I don't speak on behalf of my colleagues at the Supreme Court or the judiciary as a whole, but I believe that anybody who does not want to make decisions that are data driven probably are afraid of what the data will show. And they, in my mind, then they must know or have some advantage to keeping the system, some personal advantage or party advantage of keeping the system the way it is. And so at the Supreme Court, led by the Chief Justice, we are trying to have more data in sentencing, because we know anecdotally there are disparities. I mean, and we also know that how much justice you get is dependent on how much justice you can afford oftentimes. When someone is arrested for a crime, and again, we are a system of innocent until proven guilty, if you are retained in jail because you can't make a cash bond, you can lose your housing, you can lose your job, you can lose your family, all before you've even had a chance to go to trial. That doesn't seem to make sense. And that's not the origin of our bail bond system, but somehow we have gotten away from that. One of the beauties of my job is even when I am in a minority in the judgment of a case, and we decide things based on a majority, you know, 7-0, 6-1, 5-2, or 4-3. But even when I'm in that minority view, if I see something that is inequitable, or we have to decide a case based on what the law is, but the law, quite frankly, stinks, I get to hold my nose and write an opinion of saying, this is what the law is, but this needs to change, and maybe spur on the General Assembly to do so. So I think we are getting closer to saying, let's see what the data says, and let's make some decisions based on that, as opposed to what our political constituencies want, or what we think, being all-knowing that we aren't, we think is better serving for a community, and that we just look at communities outside of our own. So if we live in an urban community, that we think about rural communities or suburban communities. And again, trying to make decisions that are best for the whole as opposed to an individual part.
So I think you've highlighted for a lot of us the difference between being a Supreme Court justice in Ohio and being just a trial court judge, that you have more ability to state what you think that a better policy would be while still following the law as it is today. And actually, your most recent remarks gave me so many follow-ups, I even hardly know where to start. But maybe one question I have is, you were talking about data-driven, and I'm gathering this is a way to avoid the impact of implicit bias. But I have heard pros and cons to things like sentencing guidelines that limit a judge's discretion. Is that something you would like to address?
I think to the extent that sentencing guidelines prohibit a judge from deviating downward, that shouldn't happen. And it gets to, this picture is so big. Let's even look at our sentencing structure and what purpose our sentencing criminal defendants serve. And without question, there are people in our society who should be taken out of society. They have time and time again victimized communities and victimized people. I am not for not incarcerating people, but we incarcerate people at a rate, and we need to decide what our incarceration system is. Is it a system of rehabilitation, or is it a system of punishment? Are we trying to correct and rehabilitate, or are we just strictly trying to punish? Because we not only punish people we sentence to prison through their incarceration, we punish them with impacts after they get out. Can't live in certain communities depending on your crime, can't apply for jobs, can't take on certain professions. In some communities, not Ohio, but some places in the United States, you can't even vote again because you've got a conviction. In Ohio, you can't vote if you're incarcerated, but you can vote and register to vote, of course. And I'm preaching to the choir, I know. When you're not incarcerated, even if you have a felony conviction. So why can't we, if we can't reintegrate people back into society, what are we saying to them? Go back out and commit a crime? Because everybody who commits a crime is not a bad person. Some people make bad decisions. And remember, we convict people who are truly innocent of crimes. So we're creating this underbelly of society of people who we can't reintegrate back in. Isn't it better for us to reintegrate them and make them productive members of society, tax-paying members of society? I'd rather do that. I saw recently on television, the television news show, what's happening in Newark, and how crime is down and how police violence is down, all because they've reintegrated members in that community to be responsible for those communities. If any of us know people who have been convicted of felony offenses and who have been incarcerated, and I know people that I have members of my family like that, these are people and human beings who are worthy of being contributing members of our society too. But our system totally disregards them and puts them in one batch. So, I don't know what it will take to do that, but we need to have meaningful discussions about being able to stop creating a caste or group of people who are untouchables and having them be productive members of our society.
So one of the ways, what you're talking about is in particular, the consequences of being charged, convicted, and then the reentry issues. The question has come up on our Facebook Live feed about the plea process of charging and the process of pleading, since these are the ways that many people end up in the system
Right.
and suffering those consequences rather than going to trial. So the question is, what can be done to make the charging process and the plea process more equitable to disadvantaged people and even understandable to the accused who find themselves in a system that they don't comprehend fully necessarily?
Excellent question. And I think that's one of the places that starts, at least from the judicial standpoint. I mean, I think there needs to be reform, of course, at the arrest standpoint, at the interaction of the citizen and the police officer. And of course, that's a whole nother discussion for another day. But when you're suspected of a crime and arrested for a crime, there needs to be some way to have that charge against you that doesn't totally disrupt your life. And I've recently even heard of a case where someone was stopped for a routine traffic offense and then was arrested on a warrant that happened to be out for someone with the same name, but wasn't that person. So I guess, God forbid, if you have a common name, if your name is Ann Smith or Joe Jones or something of that nature, that doesn't make sense to me today to arrest anyone who happens to have a name because a warrant is out for someone else with the same name. Our technology is advanced too much to be able to do that. And notwithstanding any inconvenience it was to that person's life, imagine the disruption. So if that person gets incarcerated, depending on the degree of the felony, and if the judge or someone that thinks that charge puts someone in danger, if you don't have the money to get out, then pre-detention, you're going to stay either in jail, if it happens to be on a Friday, over the weekend until you're arraigned. If the trial court judge decides to post a bond that requires a 10% of $1 million or something of that nature, you can't raise that money. So then our prosecutors are supposed to seek just results, not just victories. And if a prosecutor comes in and says, well, I'll lower the charge to this if you plead guilty, that way you'll be out. So many people take that route just to get out, even if they're truly innocent. That can't be. We can't have a system that incentivizes pleading guilty to a crime. And so many people don't know what that plea means. They don't know that plea will keep them from applying for certain jobs or that subsequent conviction, because 9.999 times out of 10, if you plead guilty to a crime, a judge is going to accept it and convict you. So there needs to be more information about that. Yet when the consequences of maintaining your innocence and getting your constitutionally required trial means that you have to sit in jail and wait for that to happen, that's just not a tenable proposition for some people.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's an excellent point about. Now, I have one follow-up on that, and then a question that's very important to the league, and I see we're at the end of our time limit. Why don't I ask very quickly, well, these are my two questions, and it's Justice Stewart's choice. One is whether there has been some bail reform of change the bail rules at by the Ohio Supreme Court, and I was wondering for our viewers about what that is, what it involves, and what this might be. And then the second question, so you can, was whether us league, whether you're in favor of or opposed to the use of partisan labels for candidates.
Okay, and you kind of cut out a bit, but I think I heard the question. One is dealing with bail reform and what have we as the Supreme Court done? And second, my personal opinion on putting partisan labels on judicial races.
To the extent that you can offer it. That's why I put that second to give you a little time to run through it before you answer the first question.
I appreciate, because we are running short on time, and what we have done, the Supreme Court has done with our bail initiative and bail reforms is on our website. I won't address that because it can be readily accessed for you. But because I have decided to be a little more outspoken on the issue of putting partisan affiliations on the ballot for judges. I recently responded to an op-ed piece in the Columbus Dispatch that one of my colleagues wrote. So there is this move on by members of the General Assembly, and I forget the House bill number, to add partisan labels. My understanding to add partisan labels on judges' races in the general election, because we have partisan primaries when you're running for a judicial office, but in the general election, it's just the name with no partisan affiliation. My understanding is there was a move to do that across the board with all judicial races across the state of Ohio. Then, again, my understanding is that there are some judges of a particular party who pushed back on the bill sponsors that said, don't do that. We'll never get elected in our respective local communities if the communities know that we're of a particular political party. So then it got scaled down. Well, let's just put partisan affiliations on Supreme Court races and Court of Appeals races. Now, that defies logic to me, because if you are espousing the view that voters have a right to know who is a Republican or Democrat, and let's just call it what it is, those are the two major parties, it's hard to be elected as an independent. But if you feel that voters have a right to know, or voters should know, or that they want to know, won't they want to know for all the judicial races? Why are we handpicking certain races? And so one of my colleagues wrote an op-ed piece that said, well, I think it's a great idea. We should trust voters with the information. And not like voters don't have the information, because of course the parties put out sample ballots. Of course, the news media always says who belongs to which party. It's just when you get actually into the voting booth, you don't have that. But it's not a secret. So we're not keeping it a secret. But if you feel that voters want to know, there are only 7 justices on the Supreme Court and only about 67, 69 Court of Appeals judges in the state. There are hundreds of trial court judges in this state at the common pleas level and at the municipal court levels. Those trial court judges are the judges who affect people's day lives. They put people in jail, they sentence people, they sign restraining orders. Those are the judges who are in your communities. In my mind, those are the judges who people are going to most want to know, if you want to know what partisan, what affiliation a judge belongs to. So to say that we're doing it on behalf of people's knowledge is crock, in my opinion, because you would then do it wholesale for everyone. So I had a colleague who said, well, reform should start somewhere. What reform are we talking about? If we're talking about putting an R or a D behind a name, why is it that you have to start with certain races? Just do it for all the races. So I wrote an op-ed piece that says that, and just really, quite frankly, to call it for what it is, it's political. I think by doing this, you really will begin to politicize the judiciary in a way that I think will be damaging, and that's my personal opinion. I'm not trying to hide what party I belong to, and it's not hidden. Again, the media says it, our parties support us, so it's not hidden. But I think you will then begin to politicize the judiciary in a way that will breed additional mistrust in the judiciary that might empower judges to be more political. I don't think that's good. But again, if the voters if the voters really want to know, then do it for all judicial races and not just the races where your party has lost a certain amount of seats over the last few years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I can see there are thanks pouring into our chat for your comments. So we really appreciate you taking time on a Saturday at lunchtime. And so we very, very much appreciate your being here, and we appreciate your remarks. As you probably or may not know, the League of Ohio recently decided that we would be doing, as part of the league, a statewide study of criminal justice issues in the state of Ohio. And so, you know, there's a particular high level of interest in a lot of these issues among us. So we're particularly grateful for you, and your presence has been particularly timely.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks to all the questions, and you know, sorry those I didn't get to, but I'm sure we'll continue to have these discussions.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everybody here for participating in our marathon 7th annual meeting as the League of Greater Cleveland of League of Women Voters of Greater Cleveland. We're going to have a very busy year. Please sign up for the criminal justice study inspired by the remarks of our guest speaker. And we encourage all of you to consider how you might volunteer to support your league. And I believe this concludes our Facebook Live and concludes our meeting. Thank you very much.